Kia ora and welcome to Muffin Talk. This radio program is brought to you by the initiative Titipounamu, Study and Joy. Muffin Talk is a weekly radio program to which I invite guests to talk about their work and their passion for issues on community programs, social justice, Bible studies, or the Catholic Church. Today, I've invited Professor Thomas O'Loughlin to a Zoom recording for a broadcast. Tom, a warm welcome and haere mai to our radio program.
Thank you, Beata. Thank you.
Professor Thomas O'Loughlin, or in short, Tom, is originally from Dublin, Ireland. He's an ordained priest and emeritus professor of historical theology at the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. He has visited New Zealand several times and has given many presentations on different topics in the area of liturgy. In this month of August, Titipounamu Study and Joy is celebrating its first anniversary, and that's time to say thank you. And thank you is also, the Eucharist is also, it's a word for thank you. So I thought this is a good occasion to use this topic for the month of August. Professor Thomas O'Loughlin, or Tom, can you tell us what you think about when you hear Thanksgiving and the Eucharist in this connection?
Well, the first thing is we have got into a very bad habit because we love things, we love touching things. And we've got to acknowledge that that's a very deeply instinctive thing in human beings. We love owning things, having things. That's why supermarkets are so attractive. You can grab things. But the Eucharist is not a thing. Eucharist is an activity. It's about thanksgiving. And thanksgiving is the fundamental relationship of the creature with the Creator. Now, that sounds terribly obscure, but it's actually what we confess in the very opening lines of the Creed when we say, we believe in one God, creator of heaven and earth. Now notice it's creator of heaven and earth. It's not there's heaven and earth. That's a very common vision in most religions. God is in heaven, human beings are on earth, and it's a sort of a trade-off between them. But for the monotheisms, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, God is utterly unique, and everything is his gift. Everything. That's the old phrase that we sometimes give it a Latin tag, creation, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. What we really mean by that is everything, all we see, the whole universe, the heavens and the earth are God's gift. And once you realize that your whole existence is a gift of God, then the reaction is, at one level, fearful dependence. You're fearful. But if God is loving and creative and the source of goodness and joy and all that is noble and beyond us and beyond what we can describe in goodness and nobility, then instead of being fearful, gosh, we don't think of God then as power. We think of the mystery as love. And we realize that we come into existence through the act of God loving the creation. It's God's love that brings the creation into existence. And so we then respond in thanksgiving. Lord, you are great, you are worthy of praise. I thank you for the wonder of my being. Now that's very different to the notion of, let's get a mass said so that we'll pass our exams, or let's get to mass because it'll sort of bring us good luck, or can we get Holy Communion? It's terribly important to get Holy Communion. Do you notice that in all that language, it's not the graciousness of God and our response. It's the language more akin to a trading situation. You know, it's terribly important to get your exams. Okay, but it's something that you're going to grab. And the challenge of believing in the Eucharist is the challenge of believing in an activity that is fundamental, and not only fundamental, but based in the activity of graciously saying to God, we thank you for the wonder of all that you have given us. And rather than thinking of it as a trade-off or a commodity or somehow something we own,
Is that a little bit like if you give somebody a present and that person just sees it as something that you have a right to, more or less? Whereas another person who would see it as something so special that they would cherish it and would take care of it and make sure that it'll last for a long time.
Or even worse, can you imagine if you get a present where you're really giving the present because you're looking for something back? It's a tit for tat. They didn't send me a Christmas card. I won't send them one next year. This sort of and you see the problem for believing in the Eucharist is this is the sort of way, let's face it, we all behave in this way to a certain extent. Oh gosh, I gave them a really good present. They just gave me junk. Well, the whole of reality is a gift in the Judeo-Christian Islamic vision. And then we respond lovingly. And the interesting thing is that in Judaism, the place where you responded most lovingly was at the table. It's the table because it's every act of worship is a sacrifice, and this is a thanksgiving sacrifice. And a thanksgiving sacrifice I will make. I will call on the Lord's name. That's the famous phrase from the Psalms. Now, I will invoke the Lord's name. I will bring God's presence through his name into my existence. And it's very interesting, of course, that Thanksgiving over food is in many ways the perfect moment of Thanksgiving, because when are we more aware of our dependence on the gifts of God than in our dependence on our food? Without food and drink, the clock is ticking against us. And so we become aware, and thank heavens, nearly everyone listening to Titipounamu, thank heavens, and it is thank heavens, doesn't have to worry about where their food is coming from. We have built wonderful supply chains. There's always food in the supermarket. There's always water in the tap. There's always a bottle of wine that we can buy in the local off license. But imagine you live in a society, and there are plenty of them today in the developing world, where you're continually aware of just how precarious food is. And in a desert society, you're aware of how precarious water is. And you're aware of just how fragile your existence is. So being thankful for food is a way of really bringing home your utter dependence on the goodness and love of God. And so every meal.
I think that in a way, when the first lockdown happened, that's when people were realizing that they are quite dependent because some things were not available in the supermarkets.
Not only that, but they also became aware of how they suddenly needed people. It wasn't how much money you had; it was whether you could actually do other things. And for a few weeks, we actually had a far more grounded set of values. And it was curious. In some places, people came out onto the streets and just banged the saucepan and shouted, "Thank you." Now, it was very interesting. They weren't doing anything for the health service or for the fire brigade or the people who were keeping the shops running. They weren't, as it were, giving them a tip, which is a tit for tat business. They were just saying thank you. And that was a very thankfulness once we're aware of fragility, is actually deep inside us. It's a deep human response. And it's this that motivates the Eucharist. And every Jewish meal, Deuteronomy says, before you eat, bless the Lord. In other words, thank the Lord. The word bless and thank are the same in Hebrew, de facto. That's why when we read the Gospels, we have Jesus saying he blesses the Father, meaning he thanks the Father. And but every meal was Eucharistic. And it's curious that there are two moments of Eucharist. There's grace before meals and grace after meals. And the reason is very interesting. The grace before meals is the awareness of the dependence on the food and drink. And through the food and drink, dependence on the whole of life. And through that dependence of the whole of existence. The whole shebang is God's gift. But there's a very curious one after. The grace after meals is a thankfulness for the joy of eating, for the joy of the table, for the joy of the community, for the joy of the family. So we're thanking for our essential needs at the beginning, and we're thankful for the sheer loveliness of it all at the end of the meal. So there's two acts of thanksgiving, because the joy, the fact that we enjoy eating together, the fact that we enjoy having the family around, the fact that we love having the fun that one can have at a table, this is seen as a gift of God as well. So that's a basic idea. And then it takes on a special shape once a week in the Shabbat meal. And then it takes on a special shape periodically in the great feasts. At every one of the great feasts, there's eating together. And when we think of the Eucharist in the life of Jesus, he takes all of these things and he says, do it in a different way. You, as my disciple, every rabbi taught his disciples about how they should eat together and how they should behave when they come together as a community. But Jesus says, well, my community, this is how you will do it. And note that there are some differences. Here is a rabbi where the meal is not only shared, but everyone shares, the men and the women. There are women, he eats, you know, all these stories, he eats with sinners and tax collectors. It's a meal that his thanksgiving is unbounded. There's no barriers around it. And particularly in the Gospel of Luke, Luke is aware in the early 2nd century of just how the Christians don't like eating with one another. And so he's emphasizing again and again, Jesus eats with women, he eats with sinful women, he eats with outsiders, he eats with tax collectors, he eats with Gentiles. And if Jesus doesn't do it, Paul does it, and Peter does it, and so the theme running through Luke Acts is that not only does Jesus have a way of offering thanks to the Father at the meal, but the boundaries of the meal are different, and the boundaries of the meal reflect the fact that the Father loves all. So when we think of the Eucharist as Christians, it's a verb, it's a thing we do, it's not a noun. It's fundamental to the relationship, it's not a trade-off. It's not about getting, it's about giving. And it takes this form of a meal, not as a sort of an accidental thing, but it's essential to it, because it's only when we're tuned to what happens when human beings share meals that we can understand the whole richness of the vision of Jesus for the meals of the Christians.
And also the word in the Latin word companion refers to eating bread together, isn't it?
Oh yes, it's your companions are the ones you literally break bread with, the ones you've bread with, and you know, it's curious that one of we often think of human beings as distinct from other animals in terms of rationality. Well, we know now that many of the great apes can do logical operations. They can figure out that this is a good stone for breaking nuts. Now, once you decide not how to break one nut with one stone, but you have a good stone for breaking several nuts, you actually have abstract rationality because you've invented a tool. So rationality is not distinctive. Then we might say, well, this and that is distinctive. Well, one thing that is distinctive is that we share meals. Human beings have this ability to share meals. And so we're the only animals that cook. It's not enough to eat. We actually make eating part of the art form of our lives.
And of enjoyment.
Yeah, and just think of all the hassle that cooking is. You know, it's one thing to go along and just pick all the raspberries and just, you know, I love going along in the autumn and eating blackberries. I don't know whether blackberries grow in New Zealand, but they're little things. And if you kept eating for all day, you probably would get enough sugar and food to keep you going. But we don't do that. We pick them, and then we put all this extra effort in gathering sticks to make fires, to make jam, because jam, and think of bread. Bread is actually, in terms of the amount of energy we put in, we only get a fraction of the energy back out.
That's why it's fruit of the earth and work of human hands.
Yeah, but we also do it because it makes this experience far richer. Can you imagine a party without a cake? Can you imagine a birthday party without a cake? And yet the cake has taken vast amounts of energy in terms of the little bit that we will get back out. So eating is fundamental. And that's very important for Christians for two reasons. The first is urgent. When we think of a trading situation with God, we think of God giving us things and we doing things in return. Boom, boom, boom. And that, of course, is the way we're destroying the planet. It's the capitalist vision. Everything is there. If I can get it, I can exploit it. And if it, you know, everything has a value, and everything is just, you know, if I pay for it, so what? So we actually face the fact that we have hunger all around the world, and yet we in the first world are the most overfed people in history. A man called Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso said, if you want to see imperialism, colonialism, just look at your plate. Look at the fact that traditional foods are being lost and foods are being imported. So we have an ecological need to realize that you can't celebrate Eucharist and tolerate famine. You can't be thankful for the gift of the creation and burning down the rainforest. Like, you may be quite happy to do that. I was talking to a Catholic priest only a few weeks ago. He says, I don't give a hoot. As long as I say Mass nicely, it doesn't matter all this old ecological stuff. I don't, global warming, so what? Well, of course, he can easily con his people, but you can't con God. So the first element is that being aware that the Eucharist is thanksgiving for the creation, and it focuses in where the creation meets you, which is in food and drink, relates the Eucharist, the thanksgiving that we express to the Father in the Eucharist through Jesus, must take its basis in our practice, in our concern for not only ecology, but for justice over food and justice over water rights. You can't thank God for the creation and burn it up. Now, I know not like that priest. He thinks the two are, that's split mind thinking. That's a spiritual disease. But there's another interesting thing, and that is that Christians sometimes like to pretend that Christians are in the light and the rest is in the darkness. They're in the spirit and the others are in the world. And they set up this binary relationship. And Christians nice, other people not nice. And it's a very interesting, as if we bring light to where there's no light. But the Spirit is moving in every human heart. And the Spirit is moving in every human heart, and every human society seeks to grasp the divine. So we don't bring God in our mission work, whether it's to New Zealand or into the office block or into the factory or into some new family situation. We don't bring God into it. We recognize God within it. Now we then need a basic language. I'm always intrigued by the fact that when Captain Cook arrived in New Zealand, I've been reading his journal recently. It were the Polynesians that he had brought with him from other places that acted as his interpreters. Without them, he wouldn't have had an interpreter. You always need a common element of interpretation. And the interesting thing is, one of the most basic languages that human beings speak is the language of food. So, again, I was listening to someone on the radio a few weeks ago, and they're saying, "Oh, all this business of meals and all that, oh, that's all just fluff. Let's get back to hard religion." And actually, what he meant by hard religion was a very pagan vision of God keeping a tally and this guy paying his dues. God needs sacrifice, we provide sacrifice, and all this. But actually, of course, the fundamental language of religion is the language of thanksgiving and food. So we have to see the Eucharist not just as something that's terribly special, a way, a special box way far away. The Eucharist is involved in every human interaction because food is a basic to the human interaction. And there's an interesting example of that in the G7 meeting. People are saying, well, they should have had it on Zoom. Well, yes, they could have had it on Zoom, but somehow they realized that if they needed to get things organized properly, and they really needed to talk to one another and understand what was going on, they actually had to meet and eat. And anyone who's ever taken part in negotiations will tell you that the breakthroughs don't occur at the main table. The breakthroughs occur near the coffee.
I think I absolutely agree. And I remember that I was in a meeting once and they were talking about an event and there were some problems with the kitchen. And so one person said, why don't we just have no meal with it? And then a Polynesian said, how can you have a celebration without a meal?
Yeah.
And was absolutely astonished that the idea came from somebody. You can't have a celebration without a meal.
Well, of course, in Maori culture, there is the house of the meal. And I remember talking to a New Zealand theologian many years ago, and I hope he's still alive, maybe he's not. And he said, oh, well, of course, that's just eating. That has nothing to do with religion. I felt like saying, you really are a twit. You've brought your European rationalist mindset that puts religion in a chapel far away from eating and human reality, and you've imposed it to a group that actually realize that they're never more human and so never more open to the divine than when they're engaged in a common activity of cooking and sharing a meal.
So can you tell us the connection between Thanksgiving and the word Eucharist means thank you? Is that correct?
The word Eucharist, there are two words in Hebrew which go into Greek as Eucharist and eulogy. One is to bless and one is to thank, and the two come together. And it originally emerges among Christians as an adjective. It is the Eucharistic gathering, the Eucharistic meal, and it's trying to capture this notion that came to the Christians out of Judaism, that we bless God and we thank God simultaneously through the community meal.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this explanation. We will hear a lot more on Monday, the 23rd of August, at together with Brother Kieran Fenn, who is a Bible scholar. And thank you very much, Professor Thomas O'Loughlin. And we're looking forward to this session together with you and Brother Kieran, and then people can also ask some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.